The main point that I want to make with this video, and before we go headlong into the rest of the course, is to emphasize one thing, and that is that every photo from a compositional point of view must have a subject. And you need to know what that subject is before you compose the image and press a shutter. The easiest way to work out what the subject of a photograph is to answer the following question. What is the photograph of? In the final finished photograph and in a compositional context, the subject of the photograph is what the viewer's eye will be drawn to first when viewing the image for the first time. So once you have a subject, you can then frame that subject in a visually pleasing way using techniques that I'll teach you throughout the course. But you must have that subject first, which is why I'm emphasizing the point so strongly and so early in the course. So now I'll run through some of my own photos, many of which you'll see throughout the course, and I'll tell you what the subject is and what my thought processes were when I answered that all-important question for each of these photos. So I'll start with some easy ones. The subject here are the cranes, and once I'd decided what the subject was, I was able to isolate them and present them in the way that you can see here. But remember, the original scene that I saw was a much wider industrial harbour scene in Bulgaria, and I had to spot this composition within a much bigger scene. But once I'd found my subject, I was able to create my composition. This is actually a similar composition, so the trees are the subject, isolated from a much wider scene of trees, fences, sheep and other objects. Again, I've used compositional techniques to help translate what my imagination was telling me. The subject here are the people walking towards me, and that's because our eyes are immediately drawn to them when viewing their image for the first time, so therefore they are the subject. The pathway, the lampposts, the building here in the background are all objects that have to be placed using the discipline of compositional technique. Here the beach huts are the subject, and the cliff and sky are objects that need composing in such a way as to draw attention onto my subject. And here the windows are the subject. The geometric composition was used to help show off those windows in the most visually pleasing way. In this photo, the wheel of this trolley is the subject. The trolley itself is an object, as are the background elements, but once you decide that the wheel is the subject, you can then create a composition for that object. The people are the subject here. Everything else are objects to provide context and interest, and to allow the eye to focus on the people first without overly distracting from that. This is a trickier one. This photo is what I call a sweeping vista landscape photograph. The sweeping vista is a fixed, preconceived composition that I'll talk about in detail later in the course, which I happened also to apply to this scene. I knew the night before where the sun would be in the morning when I took this shot, so I knew how the light would light up the landscape. So you could say that the subject is the path leading the eye into the shot, because it's what you maybe look at first when you see the photo. But this photo is also about colour, so in the context of this composition, colour becomes an object that I needed to place somewhere in the photo. So asking the question, what is the photo of, in order to ascertain the subject, my answer in this case to this question would be that the view is the subject. So all of these are objects that need placing in relation to that. However, an alternative answer to that question, and one that I think is also correct, is that the colour is the subject of the photo. With something like this, where there is no specific and obvious object to focus on, and the eye is allowed to drift across the frame, the answer to the question can be that the subject is the view, or that the subject is the colour. So once you decide that the view or that the colour is a subject, you can then think about composing the photo with those elements or objects as your subject. So you choose the subject, and it can be anything you want it to be. The subject gives you the information that you need in order to create your composition. So there is no actual wrong answer when deciding what the subject is, unless of course you end up not liking the final finished photograph. And all this originates from your imagination. But I don't want you to think too much about any of that right now. I just want you to understand the importance of knowing what the subject of your photograph is before you start composing and before you press the shutter, because that will help provide a nice foundation for the rest of the course. Okay, so here's a final example photograph, and it's another tricky one. This is a view of a park in winter in Zagreb in Croatia. I set this scene up specifically to photograph people and animals that were walking around the park, and I pressed the shutter only when those animals and people were in visually appealing positions. So I initially set up the composition for the view and only the view, so the subject of the photo became the view rather than any specific object. Then I waited for half an hour or so as people walked around the park, and I captured these people here and this dog here. Now I have them in the frame. These have become the subject, because as soon as you notice them, that's where the eye is drawn to. So the people here have become the subject. So ascertaining what the subject in your photo will be is the first foundation stone of good photographic composition. Once you know that, you can then be as creative as you want with its composition within the photo. So now we know how important that subject is, we can get on with the rest of the course.